The last episode I did was about why most travel advisor blogs aren't working and what a blog should actually be doing for your business at the most fundamental level. The short version, the advisors getting real results from their content are being a lot more intentional about what they choose to write before they write anything. So today I want to get more specific because be more intentional is useful advice, but it's not a plan. And what I find is that most advisors don't have a content plan. They have a vague intention to blog more, which is different. What I want to give you today is something more concrete than that. A set of 5 blog post types that I think every travel advisor should have some version of on their site. 5 specific categories of content that tend to do the most work in terms of getting found, building trust, moving the right people toward a conversation. I call this the 5 post foundation because these aren't just 5 good ideas for content, they're the base layer. The posts that need to exist before anything else you write on your blog really compounds. The 5 types are the right fit post, the comparison post, the what to expect post, the destination deep dive, and the what I tell my clients post. Each one serves a distinct purpose, and the worst thing you can do with this list is write generic versions of all 5 and call it done. The whole point is to write your version of each one, grounded in your specialty, your experience, and what you actually know. Generic versions of these don't work. Your version works. I'm Justin Hinkle. This is the Travel Advisor website show. Hit subscribe. Let me describe what a blog that's actually working looks like, because I think it's helpful to have a solid picture. Someone has had Africa on the list for years. They've watched the documentaries, they've seen the photos, they've told their partner, someday we're doing this. And now someday is starting to feel real. The kids are older, there's finally budget for something meaningful, and they're in actual research mode. So they start looking, and what they find is a lot of content that assumes they've already decided. Tour operator packages, resort websites, 10 reasons to go on safari articles from travel magazines. It's all selling the trip. None of it is helping them figure out if the trip is right for them, what it's actually like day to day, whether they're the kind of people who are going to love it or arrive and realize it wasn't what they imagined. And then they find a post from a travel advisor who specializes in Africa, something like who a first safari is actually for and what to know before you book. And it does the thing none of the other content was doing. It's honest. It describes what the experience is really like. It talks about who tends to love it and who sometimes finds it different than they expected. They read the whole thing. At the end, there's a note. If you're trying to figure out whether a safari makes sense for your situation, I'd love to talk it through. Here's how to get on my calendar. They book a call. That advisor didn't run an ad, didn't post on social that day. A stranger found them through a search, read something that answered a question they'd been sitting with for months, and took the next step. That's a blog doing its job. And that's what the 5 post foundation is built around. 5 specific types of content that reach people at that moment when they're researching and deciding and give them something useful enough to move them forward. So the first type is what I call the right fit post. And this is probably the most underused kind of content on travel advisor sites, which is interesting because it's also one of the highest value things you can publish. Here's why. People in serious travel research mode, not casual browsing, but actually planning to book research, are often not asking, where should I go? They've already got a general direction. What they're really trying to figure out is whether their idea is right for them specifically. Is a cruise right for us? Is a river cruise right for us as opposed to an ocean cruise? Is an all-inclusive the right call, or would we be happier with something more independent? Those questions feel hard to answer from a supplier website because every cruise line and every resort is just going to tell you, yes, this is perfect for you. They're not going to tell you who it's not for. An advisor who writes an honest, specific post about who a safari is actually right for and who it isn't is filling a gap that nothing else fills. And the person reading it is trying to make exactly that decision, which means they're not in the early dreaming phase. They're in the decision phase. That's a warmer potential client than someone who's just browsing inspiration content. The way to write this post is to actually answer both sides. Who is this a strong fit for? What kind of traveler tends to love this experience? And then the part most advisors skip, who probably wouldn't enjoy it? What kind of traveler is going to show up and be disappointed? When you're honest about both sides, 2 things happen. People trust you more because you're not just selling everything, and people who are the right fit feel more confident because you've described them specifically and they recognize themselves in it. Some versions of this that work well, who a river cruise is actually right for and who might want to reconsider, is an all-inclusive resort the right call for your family trip, or would you be happier with something more flexible? What small ship expedition cruising is really like and the kind of traveler it's designed for. Take whichever version fits your specialty. Write the honest version. Don't hedge both sides into uselessness. Have an opinion about who this is for and who it isn't, and say it. The second type is the comparison post. This one is probably the most straightforward in terms of its search value because people search for comparisons constantly. River cruise versus ocean cruise. Which one is right for me? Celebrity cruises versus princess. What's the actual difference? Turks and Caicos versus Aruba for a beach vacation. People search these because they've narrowed it down to two options and they need help deciding. And the search traffic for specific comparisons tends to be real, with less competition than you'd expect, because most of the content that exists on these topics is either from the suppliers themselves or from generic review aggregators. The thing about comparison posts is they only work if you're willing to take a position. A post that says both options have their pros and cons, it really depends on your preferences, that's not useful. Everyone already knows that. What the person searching wants is someone with real knowledge to say, here's how I actually think about this. Here's what the meaningful differences are. Here's the kind of traveler who should go one way versus the other. So you're not writing a balanced journalism piece where both options get equal treatment and you arrive at no conclusion. You're writing what your ideal client needs when they're stuck at that decision point and they want an advisor's opinion. Share the opinion. For a cruise specialist, the obvious comparisons are between cruise lines that serve a similar audience, how they actually differ in terms of what the experience feels like and who the typical passenger is, what's included and what isn't, or comparing ship sizes, cabin categories, itinerary styles. For a destination specialist, it's comparing destinations within a region, this island versus that island for a specific kind of trip. Specificity matters a lot here. River cruise versus ocean cruise has been done everywhere. Viking river cruises versus AMA waterways for first-time river cruisers is more specific, probably less competed for, and more directly useful to someone making that exact decision. One practical thing, these posts need to be updated. Cruise lines change pricings, ships, included amenities. A comparison post that's 3 years old might be inaccurate in ways that could embarrass you or frustrate a client who relied on it. Either update them when things change or put a note at the top with the date you last reviewed it. The third type is the what to expect post. This one does a lot of the client education work I talked about in the last episode. There's a gap that exists between what travel marketing shows and what a trip is actually like. Cruise line photography shows you the pool deck at sunset with no one on it. Resort websites have the most beautiful room, shot at the perfect time of day with perfect lighting. Tour operators describe itineraries in brochure language that conveys how good it sounds without conveying what it actually involves. A what to actually expect on this kind of trip post fills that gap. And people who are seriously considering booking want it filled because they don't want to show up somewhere and be surprised in a way they didn't choose. The key is being genuinely honest without being discouraging. You're not writing a negative review. You're writing what you tell a client to set realistic expectations so they can actually enjoy the trip rather than being caught off guard by things that were entirely predictable. For a first cruise, there are things that surprise almost everyone. The ship is bigger than you expected, and getting your bearings takes a day. Sea days feel completely different from port days, and some people love them and some people find them long. The specialty restaurants are worth the upcharge in certain situations and not in others. An advisor who writes that out clearly, with actual opinions, is giving someone something they can't find on a cruise line's website. For an all-inclusive, it might be what's actually included versus what surprises people when it isn't, how the dining options actually work in practice, what you need to know about tipping that isn't in any of the official resort materials, why the room category matters significantly more at some properties than others. These posts also work well as pre-consultation reading. If you share a link before a call with someone considering their first cruise, they come in more prepared. You've already answered the surface level questions, so you can get to the specifics of their trip faster. That's the pre-education job from the last episode, a post that makes every consultation more efficient, indefinitely, from something you wrote once. The fourth type is a destination deep dive. This one has the highest ceiling for what it can do for your credibility. If you've been somewhere multiple times, if you know a destination with the kind of depth that comes from real experience, writing about it in a way that actually reflects that depth is one of the strongest signals you can put on your site. Not a general destination guide. Those are everywhere. What I mean is a post that has your actual opinions in it. The things that you tell a close friend who is asking you about that place. The things that aren't in a guidebook or that contradict the guidebook based on what you've actually seen. For this kind of post to do its job, it needs specificity that could only come from being there. Not here are the top things to do in the Greek islands. Something more like, here's how I think about which Greek islands to actually prioritize, and why the answer is completely different depending on what you're after, because they're more distinct from each other than most people realize. Not the Maldives is beautiful, but here's what the overwater bungalow experience is actually like day to day. including the part where some people find it more isolating than they expected once the novelty wears off in the first couple of days. That kind of content does two things simultaneously. For someone planning that specific trip, it's genuinely useful. For someone evaluating you as an advisor, it demonstrates that you have a real knowledge, not familiarity with the name of a destination, but the layered, nuanced understanding that only comes from actually going multiple times and paying attention. These also tend to do well in search when you get specific enough. Best time to visit the Amalfi Coast and why the shoulder seasons are worth seriously considering is going to attract more targeted traffic than Amalfi Coast travel tips. And the person searching the more specific version is further along in their planning, which usually means they're closer to wanting to talk to someone. If you've done fam trips or ship inspections, those are the source of material here. Not I visited this resort and it was great, but the actual observations. What you noticed that you couldn't have known from the website. Why certain cabin categories are meaningfully better than others. What the food was actually like at the restaurants you ate at. What you'd recommend to which kind of client and why. That's the specificity that makes a post worth reading, and that makes an advisor worth calling. The fifth type is the what I tell my clients post. And this is probably the most underused of the five because it requires advisors to recognize that the advice they give all the time actually has value to someone who hasn't heard it yet. Here's what I mean. You have a set of things you explain on almost every first consultation call. Advice you give repeatedly because it consistently helps clients understand something that isn't obvious from the outside. Things like when to book to get the best pricing on cruises, or how to think about travel insurance and when it's actually worth it versus when you're probably fine. How far in advance to start planning for different types of trips. How you approach building a budget for a trip so nothing surprises clients later. Any one of those could be a post, and not a generic version, your version, the way you explain it with your specific take on it. The reason this works is the same reason an about page works when it sounds like a real person. It shows that there's someone with an actual approach on the other end, not just information that could come from anywhere. Someone who's thought about these questions and has something to say about them that's specific to how they work. So the post isn't, here's some tips for booking travel. It's, here's how I actually think about when to buy travel insurance, because I get this question on almost every call and my answer is more nuanced than yes or no. Or here's the conversation I have with every client about travel dates because the timing question is more interesting than most people expect. You're writing the thing you'd say in a first call. That's the post. These also travel well. They work as newsletter content. They're shareable when someone asks you a relevant question on social. They're the kind of thing that you'd put in your email signature when the topic is relevant. The content lives on the blog, but it doesn't have to stay there. A few things worth saying about putting this into practice. You don't need one of each before the foundation is worth anything. Pick the type that has the most momentum for you right now, the one where you already know what you'd say, and write that one first. If you have a strong opinion about a cruise line comparison, start there. If you've been somewhere enough times that you could talk about it for an hour, do the destination deep dive. Start where you have something real to say. Make them specific to your specialty. I keep coming back to this because it's the most important thing. A right fit post from a river cruise specialist who's put 100 clients on river cruises has completely different value than the same post from someone who's done one. The specificity of your knowledge is what makes the post worth something. Don't try to cover every possible traveler or every possible situation. Write for your client and your specialty. Each post should end with a call to action that connects to the content, not a generic contact me for more information tacked on, something that flows from what the post was about. If you wrote a comparison between two cruise lines, the CDA is, if you're still not sure which one is right for your trip, I'd love to talk it through. Here's how to get on my calendar. If you wrote a destination deep dive, it's, if you're planning a trip here and you want help putting it together, let's talk. You're offering the obvious next step for someone who just read that specific thing. And write like you talk, not like you're writing for a publication. The posts that feel most like a real person explaining something, where you can actually hear the advisor's voice in the writing, are the ones that do the most trust building, not the most polished ones, the most honest ones. The 5-post foundation isn't a content calendar. It's a starting point. 5 specific types of posts that tend to do the actual work of getting your blog found, building credibility with visitors who are evaluating you, and moving the right people toward a conversation. One of each, written in your voice, specific to your specialty, that's a blog that's doing something. Stick around. There's a lot more in this direction. I'm Justin Hinkle, and this is the Travel Advisor website show. Hit subscribe.